Chapter 4 of the Train to Impossible Places. The Interdimensional Post Office. Susie pressed herself flat against the door of the coach. The train was still accelerating, and the pull of the wind was getting stronger. If she stayed out here much longer, it would simply pluck her off from the side of the train and cast her off into the darkness. For the first time, she realised how impulsive and unplanned this all was, and began to feel scared. She was clinging to the outside of a train, a magic train, if such a thing were possible, hurtling through a tunnel that shouldn't exist, on its way to who knows where. Her parents couldn't help her. She was alone and already in danger. She was also still holding Fletcher's metal rod, she realised, and she stuffed it into her dressing gown pocket for safekeeping. She had meant to throw it back to him before she jumped, but there hadn't been time to think. Nor was there time to feel guilty now. She made sure her grip on the handle was secure, then raised her free hand and knocked as hard as she could on the door. Nothing happened. The door had a small window set into it, but a blind had been folded close behind it, so she couldn't see in. She knocked again, so hard she hurt her knuckles. "Hello," she shouted. "Is anyone there? Wilmot, please?" Nobody answered, and her imagination taunted her with a horrible idea. What if Wilmot couldn't hear her over the noise of the engine? She would be stuck out here, alone, until... The door swung open, knocking her back on her heels. She tried to regain her grip on the handle, but her fingers slipped. Right in front of her eyes was Wilmot, his eyes wide with shock, in the small gap between his collar and his cap, as she desperately windmilled her arms. "You!" he yelped. "Help!" she cried, as she started to tip backwards. He darted forward and caught her dressing gown cord, stopping her mid-fall. "Got you," he said. But then his eyes widened again as her weight began dragging him steadily out of the door. "Pull!" she cried. "I am pulling." He braced first one foot, then the other against the inside of the door frame, leaning back almost horizontally in his effort to stop them both falling out. "Help!" he shouted. Their tug of war stretched the dressing gown cord taut, and Susie reached out and grabbed it, pulling herself up, hand over hand, until she was standing upright again, at which point, without her weight as a counterbalance, Wilmot dropped backwards onto the floor with a thud, yanking her in through the door. She tripped over him and went sprawling on her front. They both lay there for a moment, catching their breath. "Thank you," said Susie. "I think you just saved my life." "Really?" Wilmot gave an embarrassed little smile. "Well, I'm happy to be of service, and He broke off, and his face went pale. "What am I saying?" He sprang to his feet. "This isn't allowed. You're not supposed to be here." He ran in a little circle, flapping his hands in panic. "I need to call Mr. Stonker. I need to call HQ." "Please don't," said Susie, getting up. "I don't want them to send me back." "But they have to. You're in breach of regulations. Only authorised personnel are allowed in here, and you're unauthorised." "I'm not going to cause any trouble," she said. "I just wanted to see where this train was going, and to get away from Fletch." As if to underline her point, she pulled the door shut, muffling the scream on the wind of the tunnel. Wilmot paused. "Well, that much I can quite understand. I've always found him thoroughly disagreeable. He doesn't have an ounce of respect for the work I do here." He spread his arms to encompass the whole carriage. Susie looked around. It was cramped but cosy, stuffed from floor to ceiling with bundles of letters, boxes, and other, more strangely shaped parcels, most of them wrapped in brown paper and string. A small wooden desk had been squeezed in amongst it all, and the lamp that stood in it cast a warm, reassuring glow. The place had a sense of well-ordered business. Not a scrap of space had been wasted. "It looks like a little post office," she said. "That's exactly what it is," Wilmot said, brightening. Susie guessed he liked talking about his work. "We receive, sort and distribute mail from throughout the impossible places. No package too big, no postcard too small. Come rain, shine, or meteor shower," she chipped in. "Yes, Stonker told me. But what are the impossible places?" The question appeared to surprise him. "You mean you don't know?" He frowned. He seemed to be constructing his answer in his head, and Susie guessed he was trying to find words for something so self-evident that he had never dreamed he would have to explain it to anyone. It made her feel a little foolish. "Their home," he said with a little shrug. "The Union of Impossible Places, or sometimes just the Union, for short. All the weird and magical places that don't quite fit anywhere else." "Yes, but what are they?" she said. "Are they different countries, different planets?" "They're a bit of everything, really," he said. "Cities, realms, worlds and dimensions, plus a few spaces no one can quite agree on a name for. All different shapes, sizes and types, threaded throughout reality." Susie blinked. Her brain was so busy trying to process such a huge concept that it wasn't able to provide her with a better reply than, "It all sounds very interesting." "Interesting?" Wilmot lifted his cap and scratched his head in thought. "Yes, I suppose it is, really. And I'm quite lucky that my job lets me see a lot of places, even if it's never for very long. I'm usually too busy in here." Susie looked around and for the first time realised what was missing from the sorting car. "Do you do all this by yourself? There's no one to help you?" "In an ideal world, I'd have a sorting team and a squad of posties to handle the deliveries," he said. "My grandfather was in charge of a dozen sorting cars like this one and a staff of 100 trolls. My father had a staff of 50. Of course, things were different in those days, but I do my best." Susie looked again at the towers of letters and boxes. "But there's so much of it." "Yes, I suppose there is." He gave a nervous laugh, as though only just realising the fact for himself. He soon rallied. "But it's nothing a little hard work can't fix. The Union has depended on the possible postal service and its express trains for generations, and we're still as reliable as the day we were founded." The train jolted, and he fell over sideways. Susie helped him up. "That was the end of the tunnel," he said, his anxiety returning. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" She hurried to the little window in the door and pushed the blind aside. The land outside was featureless, a desert of frosty blue sand stretched to the horizon, broken only by the skeletons of a few dead trees. But the sky, Susie stared in wonder. She had never seen so many stars. Not even in the astrophysics book she had insisted the library start stocking, so she could borrow them. They pulsed and flared like fireworks, strobing yellow, purple and green against the neon ink stain of a huge nebula. Whatever sky this was, it was a long way from her own. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed. "But where are we?" When Wilmot didn't answer, she tore her eyes away from the window to see him pacing in circles around the desk, clutching a small square parcel in one hand and an antique fob watch in the other. "She'll turn me to stone," he fretted, "or file a complaint, or both." "Who will?" said Susie. Wilmot jumped as though he had forgotten she was there. "This is a priority package," he said, holding it up for her to see. "That means a 5-hour delivery time, doorstep to doorstep, guaranteed." Susie looked at the address on the parcel. It read simply, "The Lady Crepuscular, the Obsidian Towel, the Crepusculan Wastes." and below that, in reading, fragile. Who's the Lady Crepuscular? She asked. It's been 5.5 hours already, he said, recommencing his pacing. We're 30 minutes late. I see. Susie couldn't understand why he was getting so worked up about a simple parcel when the wonders of the cosmos lay right outside the door, but realised it wouldn't help his mood to say so. Instead, she said, she might be a bit annoyed, but I'm sure she'll understand if you just explain why you're late. Explain, he said. Nobody explains things to Lady Crepuscular. She's the most powerful sorceress in the Union, one of its highest authorities. She explains things to you. The colour was draining from his face again. Oh, what am I going to do? I can't face her like this. She'll blast me into next Tuesday. She's not really that bad, is she? Said Susie. She's worse. She's perfectly horrid. Susie looked at the quivering little figure in his oversized uniform, and two things happened at once. The first was that she realised she felt sorry for him. He must spend so much of his time shut up in this poky carriage. She reasoned, doing the work of 100 trolls all alone, and she supposed she was at least partly responsible for the delay that now had him so worried, even if it hadn't exactly been her fault. The second was an idea that lit up her mind as bright and clear as the strange constellations outside. Would you like me to deliver the parcel? She asked. Wilmot looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, you don't have to ring her doorbell and get shouted at. I could do it for you. But you can't, he said. Only I'm allowed to make deliveries. Your father and grandfather had people to do it for them, she said. And you said you'd like to have your own team. Wilmot lifted his cap and fussed with the thatch of nut-brown hair underneath. He seemed caught somewhere between confusion and excitement. But that was different, he said. They were all professional postal trolls. They'd had years of training. What if I just ring the doorbell, give her the parcel, and get her to sign for it? Wilmot's face lit up. So you are qualified? She smiled and held out a hand for the parcel. He was about to pass it over when she pulled her hand away. There's just one condition, she said. What do you mean? If I help you, you won't call HQ or Stonko or anybody else. I get to ride along for a bit, see a few of these impossible places of yours, and then you take me home before my parents miss me. Plus, I get to remember it all afterwards. None of Fletcher's brain surgery. Do we have a deal? He licked his lips and turned the parcel over and over in his hands. I'm not sure it's highly irregular. Susie said nothing, but put her hands back out, ready to accept the parcel. She did her best to look calm, but inside she was as nervous as Wilmot looked. She was gambling everything on his decision. The postmaster dithered, clutching the parcel tight to his chest, looking from Susie to the old-fashioned rotary phone on his desk, and back again. His nostrils flared. He chewed his bottom lip. I suppose you'll need a uniform, he said at last. Susie smiled. Perfect, she said.